Shalom, friends. Welcome to the Shiur in Talmud. We're studying Masechet Berachot, Tractate Blessings. My name is Eliyahu Shir, and I'm coming to you from Chesed Ve'emet, my website, www.lovingkindness.co. We're making use of the beautiful Koren Talmud Bavli, as you see in front of you, shared on the screen with you. And this, of course, is the edition by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, and you will find on it the original Hebrew Aramaic text. You'll see some notes, some translations with explanations, illustrations, diagrams, photographs, and a lot more, all there to help us understand the page better. We're going through this lesson at a slower pace than the regular Daf Yomi, and the idea is simply to enjoy the page that we're learning, perhaps get some additional learning skills in understanding certain words, and then progressing just to simply understand the text in a beautiful way. We're not rushing through it. If you're looking for a Daf Yomi shiur, this is not the shiur for you. If you're looking to improve your knowledge of Gemara and enjoy the session of learning, then this, of course, is certainly the session for you. Now, we are up to page Daf Chaf Amud Base, as you see over here on the bottom, which is 20, side B. But before we actually go to the page, I just wanted to revise the Mishnah that we learned from last time, and then we can continue immediately from the discussion that we were speaking about. So the Mishnah said the following: Nashim va'avadim uketanim peturim mikriyat Shema. Women, servants, slaves, and minors are exempt from the reading of the Kriyat Shema. And that's basically what we've been speaking about all this time. We've been speaking about the mitzvah of reciting the Kriyat Shema. Ever since we began Tractate Berachot, we spoke about the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. It's almost as if this is the most important theme that runs through this entire Masechet. We started off and we said, Ma'ei masai koren et Kriyat Shema ba'arvit. From when do we start reciting the Kriyat Shema? In the evening. And it's almost as if every Mishnah and every teaching that comes through in this Masechet goes back again to this essential idea of the recitation of the Kriyat Shema. Anyway, to speak about the subject, we see that women and slaves and minors are exempt from the reading of the Kriyat Shema. They do not have to in any way whatsoever recite the Kriyat Shema each day. Tefillin. They are also exempt from the mitzvah of tefillin. But they're obligated in prayer, in the mitzvah of mezuzah on the doorposts of one's home, in other words, the right side door of the home, of the doorpost of each of one's rooms, except of course the toilet areas and various rooms such as that. Or b'birkat hamazon, and the mitzvah of benching, when one says thank you to God after having eaten bread. Then we began the Gemara and we started discussing various issues involved in this Mishnah. And now we continue over here where we ended off, and we said that in fact the mitzvah of Birkat Hamazon is applicable to the ladies also. They must also thank God for having eaten their full and to satisfaction. And even though one might think that it is something that perhaps is a positive mitzvah bound by time, because we discussed in the previous shiur that this relates to the idea of when God was giving the Jewish people, the Bnei Yisrael in the desert, when he was giving them food, it says that he gave them the quail in the evening and the man in the daytime. It sounds almost as if the meal times was based upon the idea of times, of the nighttime and the daytime. And therefore, if it's a mitzvah, a positive mitzvah bound by time, then of course women would be exempt from it. Kamish Malan, at the end of the Gemara that we learned last time, it comes to teach us to know that they were actually obligated in this mitzvah. Omer Rav Ada bar Ahava, Rav Ada, the son of Ahava, said the following: Nashim chayavot b'kiddush hayom dvar Torah. Women are obligated in the mitzvah of the Kiddush of the day, and it is a biblical mitzvah. It is a Torah mitzvah. The Torah says that just as it is that a man must recite the Kiddush on Shabbos, so too a woman also has this mitzvah. A very interesting idea, of course, because it seems to be that this would be a positive mitzvah bound by time. And the rule is that all positive mitzvahs bound by time, women are exempt from. Therefore, since this comes about once every 7 days on Shabbos, that is when the mitzvah is applicable, therefore women should be exempt. Now, Rav Ada bar Ahava said that women are obligated in the mitzvah of Kiddush, and it is a biblical obligation. Of course, there's a difference between a biblical obligation and a rabbinical obligation. When we speak about biblical obligations, then, for example, when a person is in doubt whether he performed the mitzvah or not, he must go ahead and perform the mitzvah again, even if he did it before, because he's in doubt about something biblical. If it's a rabbinical mitzvah and a person is in doubt, he can get away by saying, oh, get away with it. And he says, well, it's a rabbinical mitzvah. I'm not sure whether I did it, and therefore he's exempt. That is why it is so important to know if the mitzvah applies in a biblical sense or a rabbinical sense. Amai, the Gemara asks the question, why? Why are women obligated in the mitzvah of Kiddush as a biblical mitzvah? Mitzvahs asay she'azman gramahu. It is a positive mitzvah bound by time. V'kol mitzvahs asay she'azman grama nashim paturot. And this is the rule. Any lady who wants to know, am I obligated in this mitzvah or am I exempt? Well, of course, women are obligated in all negative mitzvahs. When it comes to positive mitzvahs, here is the key to determining whether or not a woman is obligated. If it is bound by time, she is exempt. If it is not bound by time, if it is bound by time, she is exempt from the mitzvah. So Omar Abaye said midrabanan. He says no. This mitzvah of the Kiddush on Shabbos is really a rabbinical mitzvah, and therefore it's not really applicable in the Torah sense of the word. Amale Rava replied back to Abaye the following: Vaha, and behold. The Gemara is now bringing us a statement which is obviously going to discuss what was said before in a way of question. Vaha, devar Torah ka'amar. But behold, so to speak, behold, it is a devar Torah. That is what, that is in fact what Rava said that, first of all, there are two refutations to your explanation. First, Rav Adabar Ava said that women are obligated to recite Kiddush by Torah law, v'od. And the second thing is, kol mitzvahs asay. In any case, all positive mitzvahs, nechayvinhu midrabanan. Nevertheless, we obligate the ladies to perform on a rabbinical level. And therefore, it doesn't make a difference in any case how we look at it. At the end of the day, women are obligated also in the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbos. Ela Omar Rava, but rather Rava said, listen to this. Omar Kra, the verse said, here is a proof. Zachor, remember the Sabbath day, V'shamor, and guard the Sabbath day. Everybody knows that there were two sets of 10 commandments that were given. On the first set of the 10 commandments, before Moshe broke the 10 commandments, the word describing, fulfilling the mitzvah of Shabbos says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbos. Remember the day of Shabbos. On the second tablets, the word that is used over there is Shamor. You shall guard the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath, guard the Sabbath. Kol sheyeshno b'shmira, anything which pertains to the idea of guarding, yeshno b'zechira, has to it also the obligation of remembering, which means if a person comes to Shabbos and he knows that there are certain obligations he must be careful about in guarding the Shabbos, he must also be careful, or of course in this case, she must also be careful in remembering the Sabbath day. We guard the Sabbath day by refraining from various work activities, the 13 melachot. Please note, this does not mean work in the sense of sweating. We're talking about the idea of melachot, which are categories of work, which the Torah defines as forbidden activity on Shabbos, based upon the particular matters that pertain to the building of the Mishkan, the sanctuary. So the things that they did in building the sanctuary, these are the 39 melachot, prohibited work activities. Anybody who is obligated to observe those forbidden work activities, don't do them, says Rava, is also obligated in remembering the mitzvahs that pertain to remembering the Sabbath day. How do we remember the Sabbath day? We make Kiddush, of course. And these ladies, who il the isnahu b'shmira, since it is that they have the obligation of guarding the Sabbath day, which means to say they must be very careful and not to transgress any of these 39 melachot, Isnahu Zikira. Therefore, they also have the obligation to remember the Sabbath day. And therefore, let's not talk for a moment of whether the mitzvah happens to be d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan. At the end of the day, we have a bigger proof of this whole situation that comes to tell us about a woman's obligation from the idea of Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. Omar lei. Okay, so let us take a look. Let's take a look at the notes over here. Personalities. Who was Rav Ada bar Ahava, who we've just mentioned? He was a Babylonian Amora. Rav Ada bar Ahava was among those who spanned the first and second generations of Amoraim. Let us not forget, the Tanaim are the rabbis who are responsible for their views that are expressed in the Mishnah, and the Amoraim are the rabbis who discuss the matters of the Mishnah in greater detail, more of a discussion than a strict teaching. Hence the idea of Mishnah referring to teaching, and therefore they were called Tanaim, the teachers, as opposed to the next generation of rabbis who were called the Amoraim, because they dealt with Amira, of saying, that they would say over various teachings. So they come much later, and they define the era that spans the writing of the Gemara. Looking at the various Talmudic sources related to Rav Ada bar Ahava, it becomes clear that there were at least 2, perhaps 3 sages referred to by that name. It appears that the reference in our Gemara is to the first and greatest sage to go by that name. Rav Ada bar Ahava was one of Rav's greatest students. Rav and Shmuel, of course, we know were the greatest of the Amoraim, and we have these discussions that go on all the time between Rav and Shmuel. So he was one of Rav's greatest students. However, both Rav and Shmuel appreciated the extent of his righteousness and piety and would rely on his merit in their belief that they would come to no harm. Future generations came to cite him as exemplifying behavior reflecting awe of heaven. He was a very great man. The Talmud tells of his modesty and the painstaking care he took with regard to the honor of heaven, of his teachers, and of his fellow man. So the idea is that Rav Ada bar Ahava was an exceptional person. He had great honor towards heaven, that's God. He had great honor. He gave over great honor towards his teachers and also to his fellow man. Everybody received great kavod from this man. And of course, as Mikvah Avot teaches us, who is the man who is honored? He is the one who gives honor to others. When we honor other people, we are really honored ourselves. And of course, that's a great lesson for ourselves that we can take with us from today's lesson. It appears the calculation of the Hebrew calendar, referred to as Tekufat Rav Ada, is named for this first Rav Ada. And although Shmuel established his own calculation, Rav Ada's was far more accurate and now serves as the foundation for calculating the Jewish calendar. We take a look at some of the halachot brought down over here on the side. Women are obligated in the sanctification of the Shabbat day Kiddush, Nashim Chayavot Kiddush. Women are obligated to recite Kiddush on Shabbat. Therefore, it's a straightforward halakha. One who is not obligated to fulfill a particular mitzvah. So we already discussed that. Let us just see. So we continue over here. Omar lei Ravina l'Rava. Ravina said to Rava, Nashim Bebikat Hamazon, regarding the mitzvah of women in terms of benching after a bread meal, the blessing after the food, the oraisa or the rabbanan, is the mitzvah a Torah mitzvah or is it a rabbinical mitzvah? We already established for sure that the ladies, of course, have to thank God for the food just as much as the men do. Lemai nafkamina, but who cares about it? What's the difference? Whether it's a Torah obligation or a rabbinical obligation. If they have to bench, they have to bench. I mean, practically speaking, what difference does it make whether it's a Torah obligation or a rabbinical obligation? But we already discussed it's important to understand this principle. It makes all the difference. Why? Lemai nafkamina, the Gemara asks a famous question. The Gemara uses the expression, a famous word to describe a question that relates to an important topic within the discussion of the Gemara, and that is to what? Lemai, nafka comes out, mina, of it. Translated loosely means, what is the practical application? Why do I need to know whether the mitzvah of women benching is a Torah mitzvah or a rabbinical mitzvah? La'apoke rabim yedei chovasan. I'll tell you why, says the Gemara. It is in order to fulfill the obligation of others through whatever they have to do. For example, we have a principle in the Torah. When I have an obligation to fulfill a mitzvah, and you have an obligation to fulfill the mitzvah, and we both have the same obligation to fulfill the mitzvah, comes out, says the Torah, that Kol Yisrael arevim ze lazeh. All the Jewish people are responsible for each other. This may sound like a very lofty type of topic that we could sit and discuss to no end. What does it mean exactly that we're responsible for each other? Well, it means exactly that on a simple level. It means that when my fellow Jew is suffering or going through difficulties, I have to be a part of that difficulty that he is experiencing. When he goes through joy, I become a part of his joy. And so too, I am responsible for him as he is responsible for me. Whatever I'm experiencing in my life in terms of difficulties, in terms of happy occasions, is also your expression, your feeling, your way of life, that you too should be feeling what I'm feeling, whether for the sadness or whether for the happiness. We are all responsible for each other. We are all one unit with each other. We are all like one body. We do not speak about the right arm performing a particular action by itself as if it simply just detaches itself of the body and off it goes and performs its action. And the left arm, it just waits around till the right arm is finished, and then afterwards it goes and it does its particular story. And then the right leg does whatever it has to do, and the left, and the lungs, they do what they should do. Each one goes off on their own, performing their own tasks. Rather, the body is one unit and everything works together. Therefore, when the stomach is in pain, then it turns out that the baby toe is in pain also. And of course, it doesn't mean literally that the baby toe is in pain, but once one has a stomach ache, at that point in time, one's entire body feels low and feels like there's no energy, and the entire body is experiencing the pain of the stomach. When one has a headache, it is not just the head that feels that way. The entire body collapses under the strain of the headache. This is the Jewish people. Kol Yisrael arevim ze lazeh. All the Jewish people are responsible for each other. Therefore, when my fellow Jew is suffering, I too suffer. When my fellow Jew is rejoicing, I take a part in his rejoicing. When it's a chasana, it's a wedding, then I'm at the wedding and I'm dancing and happy for the chatan. Because if I were not there and nobody was there, because we all said that he can attend to himself at his own wedding, well, then he would just dance by himself or perhaps with his wife. There wouldn't even be a band playing, unless, of course, we hired the band, we paid the money, so that's why they came to do it. But at the end of the day, nobody would come to the wedding because everybody would say, well, it's his wedding. What's it got to do with me? And if it's a funeral, somebody died, God forbid, and we say, oh, well, it's his funeral. Let him just take care of himself. This is not the way of the Jewish people. Rather, we all take part in each other's joys. We take part also in the tragedies and the difficulties, and we try to lessen the difficulties of the one who is experiencing it, and we try to enhance the joy of the one who is experiencing a particular joyous occasion. Now, this whole idea of Kol Yisrael arevim ze lazeh, all the Jewish people are responsible for each other, takes on a new meaning when it comes to mitzvah performance. What does that mean? It means if I have a mitzvah to perform and you have that same mitzvah to perform, then so long as you have not performed that mitzvah, I too have not performed the mitzvah, which means I can fulfill the mitzvah for you. Let us take an example. If we take the mitzvah of shofar blowing, and I already fulfilled the mitzvah of shofar blowing because I blew it for myself, and there is somebody else around who did not fulfill the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Turns out I may take a part in assisting this person to fulfill the mitzvah for that person, because so long as he has not fulfilled his obligation of shofar blowing, then, so to speak, I too have not fulfilled my obligation of shofar blowing. So therefore, what is happening here is I am entitled to engage in a particular mitzvah numerous times for the other person in order to assist them to fulfill their obligation. Now, here's another one. If a woman, or let's say a person, let's first take it on the simple level. If a man made Kiddush for himself, and then afterwards, another man walked in to this person's home and he cannot read Hebrew. He cannot say the words of the Kiddush. Is he obligated in the Kiddush or is he exempt because he cannot read the Hebrew words? He is obligated. However, since he cannot read it, what are we to do? I certainly can't make Kiddush for him again, can I? Because after all, I already said the Kiddush and I fulfilled my obligation. Yes, but Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh. All the Jewish people are mixed with each other. So long as he has not fulfilled his obligation, I too have not fulfilled my obligation. Therefore, I may recite the Kiddush on his behalf. And even though I recite the bracha and everything all over again, it is not that I'm making a bracha levatala. I am not making a bracha in vain because I had said it myself, but rather I'm taking a part in his mitzvah, which is also in fact my mitzvah. But here's where the problem comes about. When my obligation is a Torah obligation and his or her obligation is a rabbinical obligation, to what degree am I obligated to assist that person fulfill their obligation if I am on the level of Torah and they are on the level of rabbinical? Or they are on the rabbinical level and I, the opposite way around, am on Torah in the sense that they are going to assist me to fulfill my mitzvah, which is now a Torah mitzvah, although they are on the level of rabbinical mitzvah. That is the question that the Gemara is discussing. Let us see it again. Ravina said to Rava, Nashim bebirkat hamazon. This story of the ladies benching, d'oraisa or d'rabanan, is it a Torah mitzvah or is it a rabbinical mitzvah? Asks the Gemara. L'may nafka mina. What's the practical application of your question? La'apuke rabim yedeicho vasan. Because we're speaking about an instance of helping that other people will be able to fulfill the obligation through the woman who is engaged in the benching, which basically means she will do the benching on their behalf and they will fulfill their obligation of benching. Now think about it for a second. If we're talking about everybody on a rabbinical level, then to the degree that I immerse myself on the rabbinical level, I can also help my fellow on the rabbinical level. If I'm on the Torah level and they too are on the Torah level, I can also assist them because we're both Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh. We're all mixed up with each other. We're all responsible for each other. But what about if the lady concerned, her mitzvah is only rabbinical in nature, a lesser degree? She doesn't really have to bench in terms of what the Torah says. She only has to bench in terms of what the rabbis say. But the man, he has to bench according to the Torah. You shall eat and be satisfied and bless Hashem your God. In that case, if it were only rabbinical in nature, she would not be able to assist me to fulfill my obligation. In other words, I'm Torah obligated, and she is rabbinically obligated. Therefore, in that category, being less than I am in obligation, she will not be able to assist me to fulfill my obligation for me, even though we are all mixed up and responsible for each other. If you want to say bishlama, all is well, the oraisa, that we're speaking about a Torah obligation, the woman is obligated in a Torah sense. Asay de oraisa umapek de oraisa. Then a Torah obligated person can come and assist the other person to fulfill their obligation also in a Torah manner. Ella, but rather, amarat de rabbanan. If you say that her obligation is only rabbinical in nature, in that case, she fits into the category, or the person who would be in that category of rabbinical, in other words, would be in the category of not being obligated in the matter. And anybody who is not obligated in a matter, therefore what? They cannot assist the other person to fulfill the obligation. You see the idea? The idea is she is only rabbinically obligated, which means she doesn't really have an obligation, a real obligation. Of course she should do it, but it makes a big difference, because if she's only rabbinically obligated, how can she assist the Torah obligated person to fulfill his obligation? Let us take a look at these points in halakha over here. One who is not obligated to fulfill a particular mitzvah, one who is not obligated by Torah law to fulfill a specific mitzvah, cannot fulfill the obligation for someone obligated to fulfill that mitzvah Torah law with his blessing. And that means to say he would not be able to recite the blessing for that person, because then of course it would be completely irrelevant. First of all, he certainly couldn't do it after the fact that they benched, because that's really crazy. But even in terms of their own blessing, they wouldn't be able to help the other person because they are only rabbinically obligated. The essence of women's obligation to recite grace after meals, mahut chiyuv nashim bebikat hamazon, there is uncertainty as to whether the obligation of women to recite grace after meals is by Torah or rabbinical law. The dilemma raised in the Gemara remains unresolved, and the ruling reached is consistent with the ruling in all cases of unresolved dilemmas. Therefore, women cannot fulfill the obligation for others obligated by Torah law in the mitzvah of grace after meals, brought down as the halacha. Since the Gemara never gave us a final ruling, we have to take the stricter opinion, which in this case is actually the more lenient opinion, in that we cannot rely upon the fact that her blessings will be able to assist the one who is obligated by Torah law. Then, of course, the blessings aren't worth the power that they would be worth to the person who is obligated in that mitzvah. Says the Gemara, therefore, what are we talking about here? What's the resolution of the dilemma? What are we going to say? Answers the Gemara. Tashma, come in here. The Gemara's way of catching our attention. A question was asked. Now we best listen, because here comes the resolution to the problem. Be'emes amru. In truth, they said, Bein mevarech le'aviv. A son can bless for his father, which means to say, if the father, for example, was not well, and for some reason he is unable to speak, or whatever the case may be, I'm not sure what's happening. Perhaps he doesn't read Hebrew, he has a difficulty, he's never learned, he didn't go to yeshiva, but he sent his son to yeshiva. Well, the son is going to cheder anyway, and he's a minor. And so therefore, the child can bless for the father. Fine. The eved mevarech l'rabo, and the slave may bless for his master. Very strange, also a strange idea that the servant can bless for his master. They're two different categories altogether. The isha mevarechet lebala, comes out according to this that a woman can bless for her husband. She'll do the benching for the bread, the meal that they've had, and he will fulfill his obligation at this point in time, says the Gemara. Aval amru chachamim, but the sages said, there should be a curse may there be a curse upon a person whose wife and children have to bless for him. Implication is, if the man himself is unable to do the blessing, and he has to rely upon his son in order to bless for him, or he has to rely upon his wife to do it for him, there's something wrong in the situation, because the reality, of course, is that every Jewish man should be competent in the laws of the Torah. He should be competent in knowing how to do Kiddush, and competent in how to bench, and competent in blowing the shofar, and competent in whatever, all the different laws of the Torah. A Jewish man should involve himself constantly in learning all these laws. He should know the laws, and to whatever degree he's able to, he should be able to even perform whatever he's able to. And we're saying if the woman is able to do it and he's not able to do it, well, shame on him, because as a man, his duty, his first duty in life is to engage in the study of Torah and to know how to behave as a Jew. On the side here, we see the halacha. A son may recite a blessing on behalf of his father. What are we talking about? A minor can fulfill the obligation of an adult to recite grace after meals if the adult did not eat enough to leave him satisfied. And that is the halacha. Meaning, we have different measurements of eating. For example, we can eat a gazite of bread. When we eat a gazite of bread, then like a slice of bread, let's call it one slice of bread. When we eat one slice of bread, we feel that we've had something to eat. But there's a big difference between a person who eats a slice of bread, which is called the gazite, approximately, an ordinary slice of bread, and a person who, for example, on Shabbos is really enjoying himself, and he has a full roll, or the equivalent of the challah. He has a full amount. To such a degree, he's loving this food. To such a degree, he doesn't even need to eat more. He feels that the bread itself satisfied him. He doesn't even need the rest of the meal. Everybody knows the difference in feeding in one's stomach of when we have a minimum amount which sustains us, and the amount where we get satisfied. V'achalta v'savata uveirachta es Hashem Elokecha. You shall eat and be satisfied, and then thank Hashem. According to the strict letter of the law, it seems to be that a person should only thank Hashem for the food when he is actually satisfied. And if one kazait of food, one slice, let's say, of bread is not really going to satisfy him, he wouldn't really be obligated in the Torah sense of the word to bench. So in terms of that, so to speak, we allow the son to fulfill the obligation for the father, because in both cases, it's not an ideal situation. And therefore, says the halacha, that's how it comes out. Fine. We continue to the next part of the Gemara. I amarat bishleima de oraisa. If you say all is well, that it is Torah, I say de oraisa, umapek de oraisa. Let the one who is obligated in a Torah mitzvah come along and exempt the one who is also obligated in a Torah mitzvah. Ella, but rather, if you say that the obligation was only rabbinical in nature, asks the Gemara, I say the Rabbanan or Mapek to Oraisa. Can it be that the rabbinical the person who's only obligated in a rabbinical sense can come along and exempt, fulfill the obligation for the one who is obligated by Torah law? The Gemara continues. According to your reason, according to what you're saying over here, Katan bar chiyuvahi, a minor, is he obligated altogether? What is his obligation? Ella, but rather, hacha, in our situation over here, b'maskinan, what are we dealing with? Kagon, for example, she'achal shi'ura d'rabanan. If he only ate a rabbinical measurement, which means to say he didn't eat to his satisfaction, as we learned in the halacha here, the asay the rabbanan umapek the rabbanan, and therefore, since the child, the minor, is only obligated in a rabbinical sense, he too can fulfill the mitzvah. He can exempt his father's obligation of benching because the father didn't eat enough on a Torah level to be chayev, to be obligated in the Birkat HaMazon. And therefore, we see that the rabbinical one can come along and assist the one who is also obligated on the rabbinical level. And then we go back to what we said before. Kol Yisrael aredim zeh lazeh. In this particular instance, it came about on a rabbinical level. Darash Rav Avira. Rav Avira expounded. Zimnin, sometimes it happens. Omar la Mishmei de Rabbi Ami. Sometimes it happened that he said this teaching in the name of Rabbi Ami, the Zimnin, and sometimes Omar la, he said it, Mishmei de Rabbi Asi. He said it in the name of Rabbi Asi. Sometimes he was expressing himself in the one teacher, and other times it was in the name of the other. Amru, they said, Malachei hashareis lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The angels of service, the ministering angels, said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, Kasuv besorascha, it is written in your Torah, Asher lo yisa panim v'lo yikach shochad. Isn't it true that God is someone, a being, an entity, that He does not find any favor? You can't manage to get any favor in God's eyes. God is infinite. He doesn't show favor to any particular, there is no, we can think about the idea. Many times we come across this expression, God's favorites. When I look around in the world, and it seems to be that certain people seem to have a lot more than other people, we start to talk in a certain negative sense, and we say, oh, these are God's favorites. God takes care of them. It seems that they're doing something that causes God to say, oh, you have found favor in my eyes. Well, nobody can really find favor, exceptional favor in God's eyes, because next to God, we are all exactly the same. God is infinite in His essence. And therefore, when we compare ourselves to infinity, we're really all the same. So therefore, an interesting idea comes out, and God does not take bribes. For example, a person comes along. In this world, he did something wrong. and he's a very wealthy individual. So what does he do? He pays the fellow off. The police officer comes to the door. He's knocking on the door. He says, sorry, sir, you're liable for X, Y, and Z. We're putting you under arrest, and so on and so forth. He slips him a few $100 bills. He said, here you go. Oh, yes, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You know what? I think we're mistaken. It wasn't really you that we were looking for. But God, he does not take bribes. God owns everything. He is everything. Therefore, something strange is about to happen. According to the Gemara, God does show favor to the Jewish people, or he accepts, in other words, he finds them in a higher light, in a greater light. Diksiv, as it is written, Yisa Hashem panav elecha. May Hashem lift up his face towards you. So find favor in it. May he find favor in you. Whoever you are, we say about you, God should find favor for you. You're a special person. We hope that God sees you in a special light. Omar lahem. So God said to the angels, V'hi lo esa panim liYisrael. Should I not find favor for the Jewish people? Shekatavti lahem b'Torah. I said to them in the Torah, you shall eat and be satisfied and bless Hashem your God. And they are so precise in exacting upon themselves to the degree of a kazayit, an olive amount of food, of bread, or to the degree of a kabeta, or an egg, which is double the kazayit. Which means to say, when the Jewish people eat their bread, they will bench even over a kazayit, even though they are not really obligated in the full sense of the word. V'achalta v'savata. You shall eat and be satisfied. This was just a piece of Aggadic, a piece of the storyline of the Gemara that helps us to appreciate what we've been discussing already in the matter of the benching and our obligations in terms of how much do we need to eat in order to then be required to bench on a Torah level and on a rabbinical level. And so that was a piece of Aggadic which come to share with us that God finds favor for the Jewish people because they are involved in these mitzvot, that even though the mitzvah demands that they feel satisfied before they thank Hashem even for a small piece of bread. That is enough to say, God, I really appreciate what it is that you have given me. A very important lesson, of course, that we all need to learn, we all need to internalize, that whatever God is giving to us at that point in time, although we can always ask for more, and we should certainly ask for more. We shouldn't sit around as if we're completely satisfied with life. But whatever it is that we have at that point in time, whatever we've been given at that point in time, we must not forget to say thank you for what it is that we have in fact received. Most of us, of course, start out our prayers and they begin this way. Oh God, please bless me with X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and so on. But the reality is when we begin the prayer, the first thing that we should really be saying to God is, thank you, God, for having given me this piece of bread or whatever it may be while I'm praying to God. And I ask of you, please help me further. Please give me another piece of bread, or help me further that I should have 2 pieces of bread so that I can feel more fulfilled and more satisfied inside myself, and I'll have greater energy to be able to serve you. We thank God for what we've been given. And of course, we ask God for more to help us along our journey. There's no reason to feel embarrassed in asking God, but there is certainly a reason to feel embarrassed if we don't know how to say thank you for what we've been given. Let us not forget, it's very important to say thank you, not of course only to God, but to everybody who gives to us and helps us in whatever way they do help us. Now, the Gemara now continues. So we just look at the notes over here. One whose obligation is by rabbinical law can come and fulfill the obligation of another whose obligation is also by rabbinical law. In the halacha and in the homiletic interpretation of Rav Avira, a certain insight into rabbinic measures is provided. For all intents and purposes, there are 2 categories of mitzvot by Torah law and mitzvot by rabbinic law. However, here it is clear that mitzvot by rabbinic law are an independent system in which there are specific obligations, i.e. mitzvot, as well as people obligated to fulfill them who do not enter into the framework of mitzvot by Torah law. Yet you show favor to Israel. Israel. The Rashbam notes that according to the literal meaning, there is a distinction between Nesias Panim Israel in the sense of showing favor to Israel, and Nesias Pnei Israel in the sense of God rendering judgment in their favor. So this depends on how we're going to understand this. We've just discussed that inside the Gemara itself, and we're just looking at it on the notes over here. We continue now onto a new Mishnah, very fascinating Mishnah this, so please don't go away. Please stay tuned for this exciting Mishnah. Baal Keri, a person who has had a seminal emission. Let us just take a look at the note over here, because it fills in quite a lot of gaps for anybody who's not quite certain what's happening in the story. Now, Ezra the scribe, everybody knows Ezra, responsible for bringing the Jewish people back into the land of Israel at the time of the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. As we know, the Torah teaches us, were Moshe Rabbeinu not to have given the Torah, Ezra would have been responsible for having given us the Torah, because he was in fact on that same level, so to speak. Of course, nobody is on Moshe's level, but so to speak, Ezra was certainly over there. And just of course, as Moshe was in fact the very first sofer in the world, Moshe was the first scribe. Well, Ezra followed in his footsteps, and he is known in fact as Ezra HaSofer. Ezra too was a sofer, he was a scribe. Now, Ezra the scribe decreed that one who is ritually impure because of a seminal emission may not engage in matters of Torah until he has immersed in a ritual bath and purified himself. So here's the story. If a man has an emission, no matter how it comes out of his body, in terms of if it was, God forbid, that he did intentionally, or which he shouldn't have done, or if, of course, it came out in any way whatsoever, at that point in time, he becomes impure. And the halacha goes into great depth, as you're going to see together, as to what degree is it permitted for him now to continue to engage in the study of Torah and the fulfillment of Mitzvot. For this reason, we know that many people, of course, for example, the average Jew will see to it that on a day like Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, the day that precedes Rosh Hashanah, the day that precedes Yom Kippur, is a very special time to go to the Mikvah. We go to the Mikvah, a body of water consisting of 40 seah of water, and we immerse in this natural body of water, completely naked, without any intervening substances. And when we do that, we come out and we purify ourselves completely again. The concept of entering the mikvah, of course, is very similar to the idea of entering back into the womb. The womb is a place of purity where the embryo, the child, is growing and developing. It's a pure place. Nobody did anything wrong in the womb. At this point in time, the child is simply growing in purity. That's all that's happening. He's in this warmth and he's developing within the warmth. Only when he comes out into the physical world and he's removed from the warmth of the water and the womb, everything going on there, then of course he comes into a real world where suddenly everything goes crazy and he's involved in all sorts of tests, etc., etc. Now, along the way, he messes up. What does he do to return back to that stage of rebirth, regrowth, so to speak, without having to speak about other religions who in fact got this concept from the Jewish religion? This is where it in fact stems from. The concept of the rebirth comes from the idea of going to the mikvah, entering into the womb once again and coming out almost as if one is being reborn. Now, that is not to be taken in the non-Jewish sense of the word, where a person kind of goes and immerses himself and then afterwards everything is taken care of. What we mean to say is, we can imagine, for example, a person whose energy level is completely out of his energy level in his body has gone out. Why did it go out? It went out because he became angry, and then he was frustrated. Now he was jealous, and this happened and that happened, and then eventually he has, for example, this emission, which is probably then on the worst level, because that's the ultimate desecration of this breaking down. And then when he goes back to the mikvah, he starts the process again. He resets himself and he says, I'm starting again, as if it didn't happen. If, of course, he does the same thing again, if he goes through the same situation again, he must return back to the mikvah in order to reset himself again. Reset. Everybody knows the computer's working and everything starts going a bit crazy. Suddenly, there's a blue screen of death. And then you don't know what to do. Well, what do? You find the technician. Start the computer again. Reset everything. This is the concept of going to the mikvah, so to speak, on a spiritual level. We enter into the waters. We go through a concept of being inside the womb with nothing disturbing us. We exit and we start again on a good note, on the right foot. We move ahead and we say, we're going to do better this time. And if, God forbid, we stumble, we do the same thing again. Now, the average Jew should and will usually go to the Mikvah on Erev Rosh Hashanah and Erev Yom Kippur, and he will prepare himself for these very holy days to be in a state of purity. Hasidim and many people of piety will go to the Mikvah once on Erev Shabbos. So every Erev Shabbos, to prepare for the holy day of Shabbos, they immerse in the Mikvah. And this resets them again, brings them to a higher level, prepares them for the Neshama Yetzirah, for the additional soul, and all things that happen as a result of going to the Mikvah. Now, those people who are more pious, even more pious Hasidim, they will go to the Mikvah every single day. And not only every day in the sense of once a day, but they will go early in the morning to prepare themselves for the entire day ahead. So when davening begins at, let's say, 6:30 in the morning or 6 o'clock, whatever it is, they will have already gone to the Mikvah, and they're preparing themselves so that they enter into their davening in a state of purity. Now, here is the whole thing. Ezra the scribe decreed that one who is ritually impure because of all of this should not engage in matters of Torah until he is immersed in a ritual bath and purified himself. This halakha was accepted over the course of many generations. However, many disputes arose with regard to the Torah. Many arose with regard to the Torah matters to which it applies, as we're going to see in the note in one moment. Regarding this, the Mishnah says, what happens? Baal Keri, if the person finds himself to be a person who had the emission, now he's in a state of impurity. Now he should not engage in the study of Torah. Now he needs to go to the Mikvah, except for one problem. He is now about to recite the Kriyat Shema, because that's what we're dealing with. What should he do? Meharher belibo. He should think in his heart. Ve'eino mevarech. And he should not make the blessing. Lo lefaneha, not before the Kriyat Shema. Ve'lo le'achareha. And not after Kriyat Shema. So let's get it clear again. The person had an emission. He realizes something happened. He's about to recite the Kriyat Shema, and he says to himself, I may not recite the blessing before. Of course, this could have happened before. It didn't have to happen while he was in the middle of davening. God forbid such a thing happens as he was davening. But the principle is as follows. If he was in that state of impurity, and he did not go to the mikveh as he should have, so what we learn from this is that he should not recite the blessing that precedes the Kriyat Shema, and he should not recite the blessings afterwards. Val Hamazon, regarding benching, Mevarech le'acharav, he may make the blessing after he has finished eating his bread meal. Ve'eino mevarech lefanav, but he should not make the blessing before. Interesting ideas. Why should that be? Rabbi Yehuda says, Mevarech lifnehem u'la'acharehem. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, he should make the blessings before and after. Let's take a look here at the note on the side. Ezra's ordinances. The Gemara in Bava Kama 82a cites a tradition with regard to the 10 ordinances instituted by Ezra in order to enhance fulfillment of both Mitzvot by Torah law and ancient customs. The emphasis in all the ordinances was enhancing the sanctity in the daily existence of the people. By Torah law, one who experienced a seminal emission is ritually impure and prohibited from eating truma and consecrated foods. In his ordinance, Ezra instituted that the individual must purify himself before praying or engaging in Torah study. This is what Ezra said. Although the ordinance was repealed several generations later, it remained the custom in many communities, as well as a custom of the pious throughout the generations. And so is the custom today. And that is why you will find that there are many people that are very particular, that they do go to mikveh every day. And then there are people, as we said, we gave all the different examples of the different degrees of people who want to do what they want to do relative to going to the mikveh. And of course, if a person doesn't go to the mikveh, it doesn't mean that he is exempt from all of these things. He may still continue to engage in the study of Torah, to fulfill mitzvahs, and so on and so forth. There are also other things that one can do in place of going to the mikveh if there is no mikveh available. Today's times, we have some serious tests today because as a result of the virus, many people are worried about immersing in the water together with other people, both in terms of whether or not it's possible that the virus could be transmitted perhaps when we immersed in the water itself. Could that be possible? I'm just asking a question. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm only asking the question. And also, of course, being around other people who are preparing to go in the mikveh, it again brings one in closer contact with people, and that can cause further problems with this particular virus. In Israel, many times, most of the times, I would say the mikvahs have been on and off, open and closed all the times, which is quite problematic. People have to pay for their membership, and you pay for a membership, and then all of a sudden, immediately the next day, the mikveh is closed, and that's it. You've lost your membership for the month. People pay for a month membership so they can go every single day, and it's a time where there's this frustration now, and therefore a lot of people are going to give up on going to the mikvah. Well, if a person does do that and he doesn't have the opportunity to go to the mikvah, as in such examples as I'm pointing out, then of course what he should do is there are other things he can do. He can have a shower, for example, let the water go over him without any intervening substance, without moving about or touching anything, and let the water just go over him for a period of approximately, let's say, 5 to 7 minutes approximately, with a full spray of water, giving approximately 12 liters worth of water. Again, I'm not being exactly what the exact measurement is, approximately 9 kabim is the amount of water that should go on top of a person, and that acts as if it is a mikvah. But it is not really a mikvah. A mikvah is still a proper mikvah. So we've learned over here so far, at this point in time, the obligations of reciting the Berachot, and in terms of the recitation of the Kriyat Shema, because a person was impure because of this emission. The Gemara continues. Omar Ravina said, Zot omeret. This means to say, Hirhur kdibur dame. It seems to be that thinking would be considered like speech. We have a great principle in the Torah, is thought to be considered like speech. If I think about a bracha, for example, is it considered like I made the bracha? For example, I have an apple in my hand, but instead of reciting Baruch Atah and I say the entire blessing, I say Borei Priya 8. Instead of doing that, I think in my mind, Baruch Atah, Borei Priya 8, and then I eat the apple. Am I considered to have fulfilled my obligation? Is the thought strong enough so as to make an effect as if it were speech? Now, if we go back to the Mishnah says as follows. He should think in his heart, but he shouldn't make the blessing. Therefore, if the obligation means, if it is that I should say the blessing, but I'm not entitled to say the blessing, because since I'm impure, I shouldn't recite the blessing. But the Mishnah says you can think it. But if I think it, if my thinking is not worth anything, why do I need to think it? Therefore what? The thinking is worth something. So the Gemara says, Zot omeret, hirhur k'dibur dameh. It seems to be that thought is the same as speech. Because otherwise, why say even think the blessing? If thinking achieves nothing, why do I even need to think the blessing altogether? Because if it should enter your mind, if you should think the following, Lav k'dibur dameh, that it's not really the same as speech, thought is not the same as speech. Lama mahaher. Why would he have to think? What's the point of thinking? On the other hand, what? If thinking is considered speech, and what does that mean? Then I may as well speak. Not so. But rather, what you're saying is that when you say that thinking is considered to be like speech, so then yotzi b'sfatav, let him say the words from his lips. I mean, if thought is considered like speech, and you tell me that I should think it, and it's the equivalent of speech, then what's the difference of thinking it or speaking it? Of course, I may as well simply speak it out altogether. The Gemara answers, as we find with the story that happened at Har Sinai. What happened at Har Sinai is as follows. There, one who had sexual relations with a woman was required to immerse himself before receiving the Torah, which was spoken and not merely contemplated. Here too it was decreed that one who was impure due to a seminal emission may not recite matters of Torah out loud until he immersed himself. So what we're worried about here, what we're concerned about, is reciting the blessing in a loud fashion. just like it was spoken, the words of Torah were spoken at Har Sinai. If a person was impure, he needed to immerse himself in order to deal with the speaking words, not to deal with thought. Rav Chisda Omar, and Rav Chisda said, Hirur lav kedimur dame. Very important principle. We need to clarify this. Is thought to be considered like speech? Rav Chisda says, Hirur, thought, is not considered like speech. The salka daitach, Hirur kedimur dame. Because that's what he's saying over here. That was his question over here, where we said it was asked as a question more so than a statement. And here he's now saying it as the statement itself. Here he's saying, if you want to think that Hirur is like speech, then he may as well, of course, say the Kriyat Shema with his lips, and there's no problem with it whatsoever. So, Elamai, rather, we need to know what exactly, how do we deal with the situation? What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with this whole situation? Hirur lav kedibur dame. The answer is that thought is not to be considered like speech. They're two independent things. Thinking is not speaking. If one wants to fulfill an obligation that relates to speech, one must speak out the words, one may not think them. Lama maharher. So then the Gemara asks a good question. Why should he think the blessings, in other words? Because if it is not considered like speech altogether, what purpose is there in thinking? Omar Rabbi Elazar said, in order that it will be that the whole world is occupied in one thing, and then he is going to sit around and do nothing. So therefore, what he should do, imagine, for example, he's in this particular state, he had this emission, he is impure, he may not involve himself in these particular things, speaking it out, because he's impure. But everybody else is occupied with their prayer. So what we want over here is that he should also occupy himself with it. How does he occupy himself with it? He may not speak it, but he may think it. Then at the very least, while everybody else is preoccupied with the recitation, he himself will also be occupied with his recitation, which of course is not being recited, but rather thought. Says the Gemara, so if that's the case, he can study something else. He can study, it doesn't have to be the Kriyat Shema. Why think the Kriyat Shema? Omar Rav Ada bar Ahava. No, Rav Ada bar Ahava said the following. It is important, but that a person occupy himself in the very thing that the community themselves are occupied in. If the community is occupied in the recitation of the Kriyat Shema, he too should be occupied in that same thing, and he shouldn't just be distracted and involve himself in something else. He should show the community that he too is involved in the same activity that they are involved in, even though he's not saying the words. We continue on to Daf Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph. This is page 21, side A. V'harei, behold, tefillah, the davar she'atzipur asukim bo. It comes out, prayer, which is also a matter of what the community is involved in, Utanan, and we learned in a Mishnah, Haya ha'omed b'tefillah, listen to the story. A person was in the middle of davening, v'nizkar shehu balkeri, and then while he was davening, he remembered that he's a balkeri, he's somebody who had an emission, and therefore he's in a state of tumah, and therefore he shouldn't carry on davening. What should he do? He's busy davening. He suddenly realizes, hold on a second, I forgot. I was really supposed to go to the mikvah this morning. I didn't go. I completely forgot. Something happened, whatever. And now I'm busy davening. And I realize I made a mistake. Lo yafsik, says the Gemara, he should not make a interruption. Ele yakatzer. Rather, what he should do is he should abbreviate his davening. He should kind of make it to the end as fast as possible, say what's basically the most important parts that are necessary, and stop. Timer, the reason is that chil, because already he began. I mean, what's different about this scenario to the previous scenario? The difference is in the previous scenario, he didn't start altogether. But in this scenario, he did start. So the correct thing to do is not to just put a complete stop, but rather to abbreviate what he's doing and then finish it off. Since he already started, He should abbreviate and finish it. Ha-lo atchil, but if he didn't begin, lo yatchil, then he should not begin. Shaynei tefillah. Now, the Gemara says, but prayer is different. The leispa malchut shamayim. You can't compare prayer to the Kriyat Shema. Prayer does not have within it the kingdom of heaven. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, where I begin to accept upon myself the yoke of the heavenly kingdom. Now, when we speak about the Birkat HaMazon afterwards, that was one of the other things that we spoke about, where you could do Birkat HaMazon afterwards, but you cannot make the blessing before. The Leis Bei Malchut Shamayim, there isn't to it. It doesn't have any acceptance of Malchut Shamayim, and yet there we're going to do it, Utanan. And we learned, and it was taught we learned it in a Mishnah. Al Hamazon, when it comes to eating bread, Mevarek le'acharav, we bench afterwards, Ve'eno Mevarek lefanav. So you see over there, with benching, that is not the acceptance of the heavenly kingdom of heaven. And yet we do bench afterwards completely. We don't make it short or anything like that. Ve'eno Mevarek lefanav, but we don't make a blessing before. Ella, but rather, Kriyat Shema or Birkat HaMazon, the reason that we have to go into so much depth with regards to the Kriyat Shema and the Birkat HaMazon is the Oraisa, is because it is a Torah obligation. Both Kriyat Shema and Birkat HaMazon, as we've learned in the previous shiurim already now, that both of these are Torah obligations. Utafila and prayer is the Rabbanan. It's only rabbinical in nature. Therefore, if a person comes to be in a problematic situation during his prayer, he can always shorten it and end it off. It's only rabbinical in nature. We don't need to deal with thinking it and all the different things that go with that, because it's only rabbinical in nature. Whereas for the Kriyat Shema and for the Birkat HaMazon, we cannot compare this to Tefillah, because these are Torah obligations. And as a result of being Torah obligations, we have to be more careful as to our obligation in reciting, or whether we can fulfill the obligation through thinking also. Thank you very much. We've reached the end of the shiur. I hope you've enjoyed it, got something out of it, learned something, grown in some way. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet, my website www.lovingkindness.co. If you've enjoyed the shiur, got anything out of it, please do me a favor and click on the like button below, thumbs up, by saying thanks very much, I appreciate the shiur, I've gained something from it. Please do make a comment, a positive comment would be appreciated, or any comments that you wish to discuss with me in terms of the shiur, any type of discussion. I'm happy to give some feedback on whatever it is that you're discussing. Also, of course, if you'd like to be in touch with me directly on my website, please feel free to contact me via my contact form, and I'd be delighted to be in touch with you on any subject related to Torah, life, growth, all these subjects that we're discussing about in our shiur today and all the other shiurim. Please do share the shiur with your family and friends. Let them know what we're doing. We need all the support that we can get. The more subscribers we get, the more people are watching the videos. This is all helping my channel and allowing me to progress in the work that I'm involved in. Of course, if you want to join me on a greater level, please come through to my site to become a positive member by offering some sort of assistance each month, so that we can progress also in our activities even further by being able to study more and be able to teach more and reach more people in all the things that we're doing. So again, thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to another shiur in the near future, and I wish you everything of the best. Speak to you soon. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.